I'm out of betadine.
Mm-hmm.
Just gonna have to deal. I thought of it. It was the obvious solution to a question about video game narrative. Tell me, what do you think of when you think video game?
Controller, playing game.
No, like an actual video game. What's the game?
Go on quest, fight things with sword. Take
no,
this.
Like a title. An actual video game. The most video game.
I don't know, what?
It's Minecraft.
Oh.
The most successful video game ever, and most popular. It works. The narrative has two configurations.
Yeah.
The conceit is, what if you had an amazing capacity to relatively easily reshape the environment around you?
Mm-hmm.
And the story is, what would you do if you were alone? Or what would you do with your friends?
Yeah, no, Minecraft, you're right, is probably the best video game of all time. But I was also thinking about how, it's okay for a video game to be an interactive movie. In that I think of...
Video games can be lots of things.
Like, something that I love to do is to play a, video game that doesn't require much mental effort like Minecraft while watching a TV show. But you wouldn't say, this TV show lacks an interactive element. Whereas if it's just a video game is an interactive video game is one of those things that comes fully packaged. You don't have to double blob. It's it's everything.
Yes. All of the stimulation.
You wouldn't release a movie without sound and be people often supply their own sound. You can add your own soundtrack.
Yeah. It's nice because some premises are engaging enough on their own. Some movies are so gripping you'll never double blob. But some stories are both worthwhile and not that interesting. And that's not a bad thing to do. There's lots of stories with the kind of a slow burn and they're nice in the background. Listening to a podcast of two people talking. Subscribe to our podcast.
Subscribe to our podcast now. We will promise we'll have better audio for part 2.
I promise nothing.
But The Wheel of Time.
Yeah,
it's
very slow burn.
I would argue it just needed it's epic. I would argue that you could probably cut out about half of it and it would be probably better. Not even just as good, but actively better.
Yeah, potentially.
There was a lot of spanking that was probably unnecessary in hindsight.
That's the people's favourite part, Rachel.
Sorry.
No, we can cut out Perrin.
Yeah, it's true. Cut out Perrin and the books become so much better.
It's not true. I have a mate and he loves The Wheel of Time and we asked who his favourite character was and he's like, Matt and Perrin.
What?
Yeah, right?
Who?
My DM.
What?
I was like, yeah, you had me at first part.
People like Perrin?
Apparently.
Is there a gas leak at his house?
I don't know, it just sounds secretly gay.
No, the gays have much better taste than Perrin.
They do.
But sorry, back to rounding up our conversation about active protagonists. Yeah, so I think that it's, you can only put in so much effort into a story, and sometimes it's okay to have a blank slate as your protagonist. But
oh god, yeah.
You do have to provide the conflict from somewhere, and having a blank slate protagonist plus a blank slate antagonist, if you have that, you better have a fucking rad magic system that is just infinitely interesting, or an amazing world building scenario.
Yeah, absolutely. You need something.
That's true of a lot of science fiction. Most of the science fiction books I've read, I'm these characters are completely forgettable, but the storyline and the world will stay with me.
Yeah, stories can be lots of things.
Yeah.
Though it's better when it's all of them at once and they're all done great.
You're that is particularly brilliant.
See Stormlight Archive.
See Stormlight Archive, which fantastic world building. The character. Even then.
How dare you?
How fucking dare
Shalon and Delinar and Ian Kaladin are all fantastic. Oh, and Navani. They're all good.
I wouldn't say, when I think of, the great characters of literature.
You think of men.
I think of Howl from Howl's Moving Castle.
Example 1.
It's fantastic. I think of whoever Tracy Lord from Philadelphia Story. It's my favorite movie.
No, you've never watched it.
Have I showed it to you?
You have. It's black and white and it has Uma Thurman. Who do you love?
Catherine Hepburn.
She has a nice face and a nice voice.
But she's such an amazing character.
Oh, that's a woman? Did you say her name was Tracy?
Yeah, her name's Tracy Lord.
That's a guy.
No, Tracy can be a girl's name.
No, I've seen Pokemon. I don't want to hear up to, bitch.
But Stormlight Archive, I wouldn't say there's any character that I'm this is among the greats of literature. I think Delinar maybe comes close.
I don't think the greats of literature is a meaningful distinction of a group of characters, honestly.
Well, but it's more that when you're when you say, Stormlight Archive is it's world building, it's character, it's plot. You're like, yeah, it has really, really good examples of all of those things. But I wouldn't say, like, when I'm thinking of top 3 bits of media to get your teeth into, for example, like memorable, fantastic characters, I probably wouldn't say Stormlight Archive.
Yeah, I don't think it would be top 3 in the world.
Yeah, but and that's not to say that it's not immensely amazing.
No, or even close to being done.
Yeah, and like, I could be eating my words. I think it has the potential to be absolutely incredible.
I'm not even sure who I'd pick for the best 3. What is character?
Yeah.
Gandalf?
It's funny because I was thinking like, oh, War and Peace, because that's my go-to for everything. But I think actually that's more example of great writing and, in a way, like atmospheric world building. And like transcendental character experience. But I wouldn't actually say the character. Oh no, they're so complicated and so interesting though. Like they feel so real.
How's your battery levels? We definitely want to pause it before we go. 10%. We have a little longer. This is probably timing out well because I will need to go pick a blue bay at some point. Great characters. We should do a podcast. We should do it with Dylan.
Zuko's gonna be there.
No.
I actually
far too much angst.
No, I genuinely think so, and it's so funny because like every time
it's always angst.
It may just be like the social media I use and like the people that I interact with skew for exactly the target demographic for Avatar: The Last Airbender, but like whenever anybody ever comes up with anything, it's always like Zuko is an example of this.
I don't think it's all Zuko.
Yeah.
It's the entire ensemble. Like, Toph is so many of them, and so is, like, Azula and Aang. Like, it works as it's a good overall.
Yeah, it's a great ensemble, it's a great show, but I think, like, the standout of everything is Zuko.
I don't know, he was pretty weak for the first 2 seasons. Like, you can see greatness culminating, but you have to remember how much of it was him whining and it being carried by Uncle Iroh being delightful.
That is also true. That
he was an ensemble to begin with.
He was secretly an ensemble because he wouldn't work without Uncle Iroh.
Yeah, he would have been insufferably boring. Then he had Azula as his ensemble.
That is actually a really good point, that maybe sometimes, characters are their contexts.
Yeah.
And so, like, I would argue that Batman would be immensely boring if the Joker didn't exist.
Oh god, yeah. I would argue he'd be boring without Alfred, honestly.
And even the Joker struggles a little bit without Batman. It's funny because he's so, stylish, and you sort of think, oh, he can totally carry, like, his own series. And you're like, actually, he's so much better when he's up against Batman.
They're a good pair. They're a really good pair.
Yeah.
They're kind of the example of the dependent pair in fiction, honestly.
Yeah, like, and it's funny because you're like, oh, Suicide Squad or like all these other media, when the Joker's by himself, he's not nearly as interesting.
No, not as much. Same with Batman. He really struggles outside of having his proper villains gallery.
Even although Batman has been getting better with like the Justice League stuff, acting as like the grounded
Grumpy Dad?
Yeah, like Grumpy Dad. Group Grumpy Dad.
Really, let's acknowledge it. Batman is just Team Mum.
And he's definitely Team Dad.
In D&D, he would be the cleric. Oh, there's no such thing as a Team Dad. Even the dads are mums. It's always Team Mum.
But that is also interesting. Like, I think we should differentiate, like, Batman is like singular protagonist versus Batman as part of ensemble cast, and that a lot of the time different aspects of them are emphasized. Like with Batman versus Joker, it's usually Batman is like the voice of reason and structure and authority, whereas in the Justice League he's more the voice of necessity, where he's like, oh yeah, I totally have a plan to like self-destruct all heroes, like to kill any member if they go crazy.
Yeah.
And people are like, why would you think about that? And he's like, I mean, someone has to.
Gonna happen, bitch. Great. Yeah, I think Zuko is always an ensemble character. He needed Iroh, and then he needed Azula, and then he needed Team Avatar.
Are all characters ensemble characters?
I think there are some... What are the good solo stories where it is the interest of watching someone alone do things?
I mean, Lelouch springs to mind, but even then, like...
His best moments really are, like, betraying Colin, betraying Nanali, and betraying Suzaku.
But you can...
Betraying the Black Knights.
You could...
Betraying Britannia.
Theoretically, you could kind of input any character into someone that Lelouch could betray. And then, like, you're like, oh, that's good.
Yeah, he depends on having other people around, but he doesn't really need a dynamic to bounce off of.
Yeah.
Like how funny people need any straight man.
Yes.
They're not funny without the straight man, but it doesn't matter who does the job.
Whereas Zuko is, like, he needed Uncle Iroh in particular.
Yes. I still have high hopes for the Wit books.
Yeah.
I think Wit, he is generally alone. I'm not sure how it would translate over an entire book, but he seems like the character archetype who might be able to have his thoughts and his monologues to himself be interesting.
It's funny, whenever I read Wit, there's always Mum's voice in the back of my head saying, God, he's annoying.
He is.
But, like, he is a little bit insufferable and not in, like, a good way.
Yeah.
You know, like...
He's abrasive.
Well, but it's not just that he's abrasive. Like, House is abrasive, but, like, ultimately, you're like, I want to be on House's team.
Yeah.
Whereas Wit, you're like, oh my God, he's insufferable. I'm not sure I want to be on his team. I think I might want him to go away.
Really? I love Wit, but he is meant to be read as kind of an abrasive ass. Like, his nose is too big and he's a bit too smarmy.
It's not that he's abrasive, it's that he's always on and he's always doing a bit and you're like, this is exhausting. Whereas, like...
I find it delightful.
House is not exhausting. You're like, I love whatever he's doing. This is great.
I love what Wit's always doing.
Yeah. And,
it's fun.
I think maybe he'll get better as the books go on, but I think Brandon Sanderson's trying to do a type and it's not entirely succeeding.
Interesting. I'm surprised you had that reaction to him. I really enjoy his presence.
I like Wit, but I don't think he's particularly, he's sort of that like Lockie, Lelouch like type character, but I wouldn't put him in the upper echelons of that trope.
He hasn't had his narrative yet.
Yeah.
Which will be weird because he's going to be very young for his narrative. Have you read much of The Liar of Partenelle?
No.
Oh, it's weird. It's super weird to have a young, uncertain Wit as the lead.
An example of that I love is, did you ever read the Christomancy books?
Oh, I was very young.
Okay.
I remember them.
You should reread them again because they're absolutely magnificent. Because you've
Christomancy, a procession of one.
That he is like this huge personality and is so interesting. And then later on, much later in her life, Diana Wynne Jones writes him as like a teenager, so like his age of 14, and you're like, he's like all of the things that make him are there, but they're in their
all wrong.
They're in their embryonic form, and it's awful. And you're like, this is so realistic and so uncomfortable. And I loved it.
Realistically annoying is still annoying, though.
Well, but he wasn't even like actually annoying. You're like, this is still a great book, but he's like, all of his self-assuredness and pomp and like style that is magnificent as an adult is like a 14-year-old. You're like, God,
you're refining it.
Yeah, you've got sort of ideas above your station. Like, you think you're hot shit.
You think you're all that bitch.
And he's like this 14-year-old in like a smoker's jacket and like, and you're just like, this is a lot.
God, I need a list of media I like so I know like what stories to think of great solo characters.
Yeah. Christomancy is there for me. Howl, I think, would be amazing in pretty much any story.
TV tropes. Lone Wolf? I feel like that would be the name for the trope.
No, lone wolves are typically, like, they're all grimdark and all like...
Yeah, and they tend to not be on their own.
Yeah.
The lone wolf tends to pick up a cover lot.
Yeah, the lone wolf is typically like, I'm all, and I want to be alone, and all these people keep coming at me and, like, wanting to be my friend.
What is the trope when you are just the solo lead? I know there's a couple of anime series just about people in empty spaces.
And even someone like Light Yagami isn't very good without L. Like, he needs...
Light Yagami.
Yagami?
As in, I am gay?
This is the problem with Japanese, is so much of the time you're like, you could pronounce it technically correct, like the Japanese way, but then it sounds weird in English. Like, you don't call it, like, anime.
Anime. That's true. I just go by what they say on, like, the double sub.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, Light...
Light was interesting.
Maybe.
L was very interesting.
Did you ever watch House of Cards?
No, I only got 2 episodes in. I don't like politics.
You should watch it. It's so good.
No.
But, like, the first 2 seasons are kind of perfect and I think are the ultimate example of a main character who doesn't actually need... Like, you're watching it for Frank. Everybody else is, like, a bit part. And, like, it's funny because I think people were like, oh, this show is amazing and has amazing ratings. But all the critics were like, he doesn't have, like, a worthy adversary. He's just, like, steamrolling everyone. And you're like, yeah, that's the core engagement. And then when they added, like, a worthy adversary and, like...
That wasn't interesting.
Yeah, you're like, this sucks.
Yeah. Sometimes you need an OP protagonist. Yeah. One Punch Man is not fun when he's no Punch Man. I like Temperance Brennan. Bones is a very fun character.
Although, it's the dynamic of, like, the straight man... like the uber straight man of Bones versus like the regular dude of Brennan. Oh, sorry, other way around.
I do not like Booth very much. He's such a weird archetype, and I keep looking at him and being like, is this what people used to think men were?
Yes.
He's horrible.
Yes.
He's both an asshole and incredibly unhappy and boring.
Yes.
He's the worst. Who would ever want to be this?
That was like American masculinity circa like the 80s and 90s.
It was awful.
It is terrible.
I still find him exhausting. I'm only here for like his occasional good moments.
He's kind of like a dinosaur actually, because even at the time when it came out, I was like, this is a very old-fashioned version of like a dude.
Yeah. He's at his best when he's either like having nice dynamics with all of the squints, or he's with his son.
Yeah.
Basically when he's not being the weird guy.
Like, I think the best part about that particular archetype is that they make a very good, like, Papa Bear.
They do.
You know, like, he's very loyal and, like, is always there. Like, he would sacrifice himself for the people he loves. And you're like, okay, that's beautiful. Yeah. But also, like, he's a very unhappy man.
Papa Bear doesn't need to be that boring. You can be loyal and not that.
Yeah. I also say, like, watching the very first couple of episodes of Bones is really weird because it, like, hasn't found its stride yet.
No, not at all.
And actually both Booth and Brennan and the Squints are all kind of assholes. You're like, why are they so abrasive? Yeah. And it's weird because like they find this happy medium later on where they all kind of like become buddies. And you're like, this is so much better.
Yeah. Same with Big Bang Theory. It's weird, the development of TV shows. They tend to air slightly before they're done with their edits and their story revisions.
The pilot is always a bit shaky.
Season 1 is always a little shaky.
There are very few programs that are perfect from season 1, and then there are the weird ones like Heroes, where season 1 is like
the only good bit.
The glorious apotheosis of like 2010s, whatever it is, of like
2010
naughties like television, where you're like, this show is perfect. I cannot wait for season 2, and you watch it and you're like, wow, this is bad.
Yeah. Even Avatar wasn't awesome season 1.
No, it was just a not regular kids show.
Yeah, they just kept fucking about in the snow. They didn't have all the best characters in the world.
And then like suddenly it gets, oh god, they get so good.
It gets really good. I do like